Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our Pride Month panel in honor of Pride Month since we are in June. I'm joined here with Arthur from the Staten Island Pride Center. Please feel free to introduce yourself and say a few words about your position and your role.
Sure. My name is Arthur Charles. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am the community educator for the Pride Center of Staten Island. I've been with the Pride Center in this capacity for about 3 years. Prior to that, I volunteered at the Pride Center for about 8 years in a few different ways, including organizing our Pride events for several years. And I'm excited to talk about the LGBT community in Staten Island and abroad and in bigger picture sense. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here for everyone. I'm Stacey Shapiro. I'm the Youth Engagement Specialist at the Summer Youth Employment Program for United Activities Unlimited. And if you have any questions at all, if you're joining us on Zoom, you can put them in the chat, or if you feel comfortable, you can unmute yourself. We're also monitoring the chat on Facebook, so if you have any questions, we'll be sure to get to them as well. And I kind of want to start off with talking a little bit more about what is Pride itself, like modern Pride events. Historically, like I did a little bit of research, I know they originated from protests originally to improve the rights of the LGBT community, and now like LGBT rights movements have been quite successful in changing laws in many countries over the last few years. I should say the last few decades, including the U.S. And as Pride, I just want to kind of talk a little bit more about what sort of Pride is now these days. Is it now more of a celebration, or is it like a protest that is still needed? How do people say, moreover, how do people celebrate Pride and participate in Pride locally?
So that's a lot, right? And so I want to unpack your question a little bit. So it is all of the above. Pride is, it's one of the funny things about my job is I come around and I get a lot of information, but it's really hard to define any one thing for an entire group of people, right? I'm giving you perspectives, I'm giving you information as I have access to it, but people's definition of Pride is really insular and really about who they are as a person, right? So I'm going to give you sort of general perspectives on Pride as I kind of understand it. So yes, speaking to what you said, the historical perspective. So Pride comes from the Stonewall Riots, or the Stonewall Uprising, as it's sometimes called. And that began in the very early hours of June 28th in 1969, when New York City police raided the Stonewall Inn, which is a gay bar that is still in Greenwich Village, still operational today. It actually has landmark status. The raid sparked a riot between the bar patrons and the neighborhood residents, as police were being really aggressive and roughly and physically harming employees and patrons inside the bar. So it became a 6-day standoff of protest and violent clashes with law enforcement on Christopher Street, right in this Greenwich Village area, and it carried over into neighboring areas, the park across the street. And the Stonewall Uprising serves as a catalyst for the beginning of a gay rights movement. And we say gay rights because in this context of 1969, that's the word we had. We had gay and lesbian. We didn't really talk about this other parts of the community yet. These letters grew and language evolved as we created more language, as we needed more language to describe members of our community. And it kicked off a movement that was seen both nationally and around the world. Prior to Stonewall, there was already activism happening. There were significant movements that happened. There were major movements in Philadelphia with Black queer folks, and in Los Angeles. So we did see other movements, but nothing that seemed to have the spark of Stonewall. The 60s and the preceding decades were not a welcoming time for lesbian and gay people. We had instances of, we'll talk about New York, it was illegal to solicit a same-sex relationship. What that means is anybody's guess. But reasons like that, people would look for bars and clubs that were secretive and protective because they were a place of refuge, a place to express yourself. But when the Liquor License Bureau found out that these bars existed, they would shut down establishments that served alcohol. So you can't exist anymore because LGBT existence was considered disorderly by nature. All of this is to say that from that moment forward, we're still dealing with some of that same stigma. We are still dealing with pockets of society that view our existence as disorderly, that view us as an inconvenience, as not acceptable. And the legalities of that still exist. So while there are gay bars can exist and they get liquor licenses, we're still fighting for a lot of legal things. So when I refer to Pride March, I use the word march because marches are political in their connotation, right? A parade is the Thanksgiving Day parade. And while the LGBT Pride March is decorative and fun and celebratory, there is still a political piece to this. We're still working on equity in this culture, for LGBT people, for BIPOC LGBT people. So I think it has a lot of layers. It is a celebration, certainly for those of us who have been around and are celebrating our identity, but it's also a call to action to remind us that we're still not fully equal in this culture, in this country.
Yeah, thank you. I know it is a lot to unpack, and I'd love to like hear a little bit more in your experience, like how like the marches have really sort of progressed and grown and developed to what they are today compared to what they were when they were first established.
Well, they're certainly more organized, right? I mean, we have parade, we have it's a very well-oiled machine nowadays, the official Heritage Pride March. You're also seeing Queer March, the Resistance March, marches that are sort of counterculture, asking for more political involvement. We're seeing a pushback to be more political nowadays too. In my time, I've been out for about, God, 23 years. And so just from when I've been going to Pride events my whole life, you know, issues that are facing our community, this is a great platform. So you'll see organizing groups march under their banner and send out big messages about marriage equality when that was the topic of the day, right? So now we're talking a lot about our trans brothers and sisters. We're talking about Black trans folks and their rights and their treatment. When there was the walking while trans law that was recently repealed, which was a law that was basically making it legal to target trans people as assuming they're sex workers. And that was just repealed. So these laws are often focal at the parade or at the march because people are saying, look, this is happening. So they might use a float, they might use something colorful, but it's still sending that message, and it's been effective. We've seen different issues come across the march because we've seen different issues be tackled and helped, but we're still dealing with other issues, right? Right now, we're dealing with trans athletes and their acceptance in place, foster parents and adoption policies at a national level, discrimination in those ways. So, I mean, for every battle we win, there's still battles being fought.
Oh, yeah, that's very true, especially like you mentioned, like there is a lot of issues even like regarding to like legal things and stuff like that. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about, in your opinion, like what are like the most pressing issues? What are like some of the most significant issues that are affecting the LGBT community today?
I mean, it's a huge ask, right? I think there's a lot of things affecting us. Obviously, internally, even within the community, acceptance of trans folks and creating space for trans and gender expansive folks. I think a lot of that's education. So that part of the work I do is going around and educating people both in the community and outside of the community about who's in our community, about language that we're using. Language is such a powerful weapon and such a powerful tool. It can be both. And we want to make sure folks are equipped with adequate language and understanding of the different moving parts of our community. So like even in the letters, right, LGBTQ plus, we're talking about so many different vectors of a person's identity, their gender identity, their sexual orientation. Sometimes there's overlap in those pieces. Sometimes they're just two different things that are existing. So I think honestly at the root, it's language and understanding. We really need to get folks educated about what our community is and what we're made up of, so that we can get folks to have more empathy.
Yeah, very true. I know, like you mentioned now, like there is a lot of issues, like there's a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding with the language. And I know, like you just mentioned, like gender identity and sexual orientation. I know there's a bunch of other terms that people may not necessarily know what they exactly mean, that they think may be interchangeable and mean the same thing, but they aren't. So if you could like explain a little bit more about what the differences between some of those terms, like.
Sure, I can do a brief language lesson, right? So sexual orientation is their attractions, right, or lack of attractions, because we have members of our community that are the A is asexual or aromantic, a person who has little to no sexual desires or romantic desires. So everyone has a sexual orientation. So off the bat, just understanding that, because I think sometimes when we hear questions around someone's sexual orientation, we assume that we're discussing someone being in the community, and that's not always the case. We're just talking about how someone might be oriented. Gender identity is something we all have as well. We all have a sense of So our gender identity is our internal sense of being a man or a woman or something else or some other gender, using another term for it because those terms don't feel like they define us. But we live in a culture that is very defined by heterosexism, right? This idea that people are inherently straight. And with that comes a binary thinking about gender, that a person is born and they're assigned male and they're going to grow up to be masculine and they're going to marry a woman. And that's just the only way things can work out. And we know fundamentally that's not true. We know that people exist in a myriad of different ways. So gender identity is about how you self-identify, how you see yourself, whereas your sex is what you're assigned at birth. And that is the only time where the answers are pretty concrete. It's male, female, or intersex. But gender identity, you could be male, you could be female, you could be man or woman, you could be masculine or feminine, or you could be gender expansive, gender non-binary, NB. There's a lot of other terms being used for folks who do not fall into a binary way of looking at themselves.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, and also like I'd love to learn like how can we like approach this like topic or like even like have this discussion in a way in general and like regular like day-to-day communication with people that may not be very familiar with those terms or what they mean or the connotations they may carry.
So some of the easiest things to do are just ask questions of people that you know in your life and introduce yourself. Like, so you'll notice when I introduced myself, I said, hi, I'm Arthur. I use he, him, his pronouns, right? I'm creating a dialogue in that. I'm creating space for you to share yours with me if that's something you feel you want to do. I'm creating a chance for you to ask me, what do you mean by that? Like, I don't understand what you're asking or what you're telling me about yourself. So again, it's creating a shift in the culture of the conversation we're going to have. And I do it, I try to do it. I try to remember to do it socially. I definitely do it all the time in my work. It's just a little thing that lets someone say to you, oh, this person is thinking about who I might be, because I can't tell who you are by looking at you. I don't know your story by looking at you, and I want to understand the people I'm interacting with. So just again, creating those little opportunities for someone to say, oh, well, actually, I use they, them pronouns and I identify as non-binary, just to give someone an opportunity to let you know who they are. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is to be vulnerable yourself and to share who you are.
Yeah, that's a very true point. I'm like, what like advice, like what insights would you give someone who doesn't feel very, who like you, like I know you mentioned, like it's about being vulnerable, but for someone who may not feel comfortable being vulnerable.
Sure, and I think that I think by using that word, I kind of set myself up for this question. I mean, it's not even a vulnerability. It's just about a conscious culture choice, right? So to say to somebody, hey, you know, introducing yourself this way is more and more, I think, normal nowadays too. We're seeing, you know, Instagram and TikTok, more people are really coming forward and saying, these are my pronouns, this is how I identify. We're seeing more people in the public eye come out as non-binary or gender expansive. Again, there's a lot of terms that people use in a way that feels comfortable for them. Language is very individual. So I'm giving you some of the language that we see commonly in the community, but other folks might use other language. There's always other language. One of the things I really have accepted about this community and in the work I do is I've learned to be adaptable with language and just sort of accept that when someone comes to me with a term I haven't heard before, it's okay to say, oh, I've never heard that before. Do you mind explaining it to me? And they may say, I'm not comfortable explaining it. And that's Google's our friend, right? We can Google things. We always want to respect people's boundaries, but it doesn't hurt to ask a question if it's a respectful question, if you're coming from a place of wanting to know and grow with someone.
Yeah, that's a very true point. Like even not just in terms of like pronouns. Like I remember I was at a like a training a few weeks ago where the moderator ended actually was like describing themselves, like their physical appearance for those who may who those for those individuals who may not be able to see or even hear, who require other forms of assistance. And I thought that was really fascinating because that's something that we really overlook as well. Like with pronouns, like you're mentioning, that's something that's becoming more common, which is wonderful. But there are other forms of like accessibility that we still need to consider. So that just brought that to mind.
No, that's actually a great example. And another group I'm a part of, we do start our introductions that way. We'll say, you know, I'm a white cis man, bald with a beard. And I haven't made it part of my everyday practice, but it is another great encourageable practice. We want to be mindful of intersections too, right? Like you're talking about something that would create more disability access. I'm talking about LGBTQ access, but there's overlap, right? There's disabled
Yes,
LGBTQ
exactly.
people. We want to be mindful of the fact that we're not ever looking at just one vector or one aspect of a person. People are made up of a lot of different parts. So these considerations that sometimes get criticized by the public or the media, they're not people being sensitive. It's just acknowledgement of who people are, so that we aren't making blind assumptions any longer.
Yeah, like I remember like also like that also brings to mind like at another recent training that was tailored around like diversity, equity, and inclusion. We watched this TED talk about this young woman who was speaking about this thing called one story, where if you're exposed to like the culture of someone, like you're exposed to like one aspect of a person's culture, how they identify, then you start to identify them with that person is only identifying with that particular story or that particular experience, and that's very not true because we all as humans are very unique, we're very multifaceted. It's important to not make assumptions, so like really come with a genuine curiosity, come with a genuine interest for your individual, for your like friends, your colleagues, even people that you meet on the street.
Right. And I think part of it's also acknowledging that you, like you said, individual pieces, right? I'm here as a representative of the Pride Center. So in some capacity, I'm speaking about my community, but in no capacity am I ever fully representative of the LGBTQ community. No one person could be. But I try to do my research and see what the concerns are and voice the issues and the realities as I can find them that are being shared by other people from an educational standpoint. But I think it's really hard to pigeonhole or completely define one group of people by one set of examples or one set of ideas.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like something again that's a topic or challenge that we face in our society. Like as progressive as we are becoming, which is wonderful, there is still a lot of progress that does need to be made, and it really just starts by taking those small steps.
Absolutely.
And to that point, like I'd love to hear a little bit more about your particular role at the Pride Center and what motivated you to join the Pride Center and be engaged and active in civic oriented work.
So these questions have so many great answers. So at the community educator and the education and outreach person for the Pride Center, my work is fundamentally going to different nonprofits, community organizations, medical organizations, mental health practices, medical practices, and discussing how to be more inclusive of LGBTQ plus folks, right? How do we make sure we're creating space for people to tell us who they are? Are our questions and our practices mindful of the experiences of LGBTQ people? Because especially when it comes to receiving services, mental health, medical, or even social, queer folks are often weary. There's a distrust in systems because they haven't often created space for us. They haven't often thought about how to include us in the conversation or ask questions of us that make good sense. They do come from that heterosexist place I talked about. So that's one facet of the work I do. I also offer other workshops. So I'm a clinical social worker by training. That's actually how I started working at the Pride Center as I was in graduate school, and this was a great part-time job that I could have while I was getting my master's. So I also offer workshops on healthy relationships and intimate partner violence from an LGBTQ perspective, because again, when we're thinking about how power dynamics exist for marginalized people, we have to understand that we're coming to the table with a different sense of power because we don't have power in a lot of conversations, right? So just to help queer people and other people understand that perspective of our relationships, how to interact with one another in a way or deal with one another in a way that is mindful of the things that we share and the ways that we're different. So that's another series of workshops I offer through the center that I get to do. I also represent us at different outreach events and try to connect members of the community from all parts of Staten Island and the greater city to the center for different services and just sort of see how we can help people have a good fit with us and be a part of our space.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And my apologies for the noise in the background.
Oh, no, you're fine. Oh, and then I guess you asked me about my own commitment to civic and like social activism. That I was a young LGBT person. I came out of the closet when I was 13. I wound up moving out of my house. I was homeless when I was 16. I went to the Harvey Milk High School, which is an LGBT high school. And so they just instilled in me a sense of activism and social justice. And from there, I sort of grew and I got a degree in LGBT studies for my undergraduate degree. And I wound up working for nonprofits on Staten Island and doing HIV work and social justice work, and kind of just grew into this career that I have now.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really amazing and really like, inspirational to hear. Like I know you were, and like you were mentioning, like you do a lot of that. Really, like your experiences, like really help motivate you to be engaged in like civic and social justice. So I'd love to hear like your opinions and your insights on how, in what ways can we advocate for the LGBTQ community.
So education, I think, is the number one thing to do allyship, right? Because I think when we talk about being advocates, we're talking about being allies. I think first and foremost, we have to look at allyship as an action. It's not just a label. It's not enough to just say, well, I like gay people, I support gay people, I support the community. Like, what are you doing? Are you when you hear homophobic and transphobic things, are you calling people out on it? Are you volunteering in places? Are you doing the education you need to understand this community that you're supporting? That's really a huge first step. So if you can, join us at the Pride Center and I'll happily sign you up for one of my cultural awareness trainings. But if that's not something you have time for, like, hop on Google and try to find, reputable articles that explain the language and the history of this community. So you have a sense of like the kinds of struggles people are still dealing with, because I think sometimes the media presents us with the wins, and so we forget that there's still struggles. And I think it's getting better. I think we're seeing a more balanced version of things that are happening in our community. But I remember when LGBT folks were first given federal access to marriage, so many people I knew who identified as allies just sort of stopped being involved in politics and stopped being involved in activism. And getting married is great. It's a tremendous civil liberty that we were afforded, but it's far from the only thing that we need help with as a community, especially LGBTQ being a vast community. It's not just allowing lesbian and gay people to get married. What are we doing to support trans individuals? Because they face different burdens and different vulnerabilities from a legal perspective and a medical perspective. So just being mindful of what you're really supporting and doing that education. And then acknowledging your own privilege, right? When you come to the table and just sort of thinking about how you're taking up space as an ally, as an advocate. Because when we're passionate about helping people, sometimes we forget to check our own privileges. And that's something that's true even for people within the LGBT community, because we are intersectional and we do have different identities that can bring privilege to the table.
And those are some very good points. Like, I know you're mentioning, if you're talking like publicly, like how we as a general public, how we as a community as a whole can like be allies and like advocate and like really educate our colleagues, our coworkers, our family members. But what about how specifically like nonprofit organizations or just institutions themselves, how can they advocate? How can they show their support for the LGBT community if they may not identify as members of the LGBT
I mean, and I swear I'm not trying to constantly self-promote, but having me come and do a training is a really effective thing. Like getting staff on board, making it part of your orientation process. There are organizations that I work with that I come on every 2 to 3 months and I meet with new staff and I do a training ongoing for years now, because that's part of their values as an agency, is to make sure their staff has diversity and equity training on an ongoing basis. Having policies in place and making sure those policies are known. I mean, some of them are federally and state mandated anyway, but making sure that you let people know that like we follow these policies about anti-discrimination. Some things we're very fortunate because New York State has a lot of policies in place that create this sort of equity without even realizing it, right? A single occupancy restrooms are gender neutral in New York, regardless of where you are. Things like that create this, but having visibility, right? Having pride or safe or brave space stickers or something that sort of acknowledges that like this is a brave space for LGBTQ folks year round. It's not just something we're doing in June. I get the most requests for this in June, but this community needs support all year round.
Yeah, it's a wonderful point. That was actually what I was going to get to later on. Like, it is. I'm gonna, by all means, you can definitely sort of refer to that point now. But like Pride Month is beautiful. It's a wonderful thing for sure. Like, we are like giving a chance to like really advocate. But like you mentioned, like how can we give back to the LGBT community all year round, not just for Pride Month?
Right, and I think this is again an issue that every marginalized group can relate to, right? We have Black History Month, we have Women's History Month, we have Pride Month. Groups seem to get 1 month or sometimes 1 week or sometimes 1 day that's like, you get this, but the problems and the issues and the support these groups needs exist well beyond these days. So just remembering that, like, yes, it's wonderful to wish your LGBTQ folks a happy Pride in the month of June. It's really supportive and wonderful, and we are appreciative of it. But remembering on July 1st that like we're still here, that we still need to have access, we still need to feel welcomed, that your intakes, that your like, that's a great example. So nonprofits can have intakes when they fit new clients or new employees that include a space for someone to tell you their pronouns, a space for someone to tell you the name they prefer to be called if it's not their legal name. Making sure that when you're asking questions around gender and sex, that you're differentiating those categories and letting someone create space for someone to give you the language they might use. Those little things can really make a huge difference on whether or not an LGBTQ person is going to feel like this is a place that wants them there, that values their input, that values their participation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And like again, like you did mention language, and I know besides like what we were talking about earlier, like the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation, even like in regards to pronouns, like the language around pronouns has changed. Like I know like what the acceptable term now is affirming pronouns.
Yep.
Could you talk a little bit more about that and like other types of like language and other types of affirming language?
So pronouns, name is a huge thing. Again, asking yourself if you're doing work, if you're a nonprofit service worker of some kind, like if you're a social worker, an intake worker, whatever it is, making sure that the kinds of questions you're asking are relevant to your work and not just your own sense of curiosity about somebody who might be different from you. Because I think sometimes when we're meeting people who are new, we kind of go into this place of like, oh, I wonder, and I think about, and it's not an individual's job, especially if they're coming to your agency to get help, to be your educator, right? So you might want to just be mindful of those kinds of things. Um, like I had mentioned earlier, and I do kind of nail this one home a lot, is just introducing yourself with your pronouns, acknowledging that like, if you are cisgender, which cisgender is a term that means you identify with the sex you were assigned at birth. So I'm a cisgender man and I use he, him, his pronouns. So, and people look at me and I present masculinely. I wear a beard, so I often get called he, him, or sir, like those kind of things. So for me, it's not introducing myself with my pronouns isn't just about my own assertion because people are making those assumptions about me, but it's to remind people to not assume, and it's to remind people that like I want to create space for people to tell me who they are. So even if something doesn't necessarily feel like it applies to you, it's okay to use the language to make the space. And I think that's a thing people sometimes forget, that they're like, well, I don't need to tell you my pronouns because I'm cisgender and I'm straight. Well, that's not what it's about. It's about, again, introducing yourself as a way of creating space for other people to see that that's the expectation. People are doing in their emails. It's little simple things like that can really be a very effective tool.
Yeah, very true. And like to your point, like it's not like you're alluding to like helping like foster and develop and build that culture of inclusivity,
Right.
of diversity, and what other ways can like the general public help create a culture of inclusivity, like even if your interactions with your family and friends, and then even on the other hand, like an organization itself.
So, I mean, again, having those like some agencies will have a placard or something when you walk in that says, this is an organization that values inclusivity. We will allow anybody to participate in our programs regardless of race, gender, sexuality, et cetera, et cetera. And then you might have a little rainbow sticker or something with that. And that can be really effective. Having rainbow stickers or flags in your office, even if it's just like in your pen holder, like LGBTQ people look for it. Like I always call it like the happy dog reaction. If I'm driving around with my husband on Staten Island, if somebody has a bumper sticker that in any way, shape, or form acknowledges the community, I'm like, oh my God, look, gay car over there. Because it's not something I see very often on Staten Island. So when I do see it, I get excited because I feel like, all right, there's another person out there who's has my back, who's thinking about my, or is a member of my, like, I don't know why they have it. I have to also make up a whole story about why they might have it. So those little things really do send a message. So, if you are someone who's an ally, having a rainbow pin or a sticker on your name badge at work or on your bag all year round, not just for Pride. I think that's really what the message here is that, it's great that so many companies have jumped on board the rainbow capitalist game. And I know so many people are like, rainbow capitalism is terrible. But for me, who came out in 1998, I had nothing. We had no symbols. So it's nice to see them, but let's make sure we're showing them beyond June. When they all go on sale next month, buy them all up and put them in places that people can see them. Send those messages out there so people know they have space with you.
Yeah, very true. Like, I mean, even to your point, like it's like even like a little thing like a bumper on your car, like you're mentioning, like a pin that could be
A
like
sticker, yeah, whatever it is, it really does make a difference.
and like I do know like that, like you're mentioning, like the symbol is a rainbow for those for like our audience members who may not know the significance of the rainbow or why The symbol is a rainbow. Could you share?
Quick little slideshow on this that I've been showing around to folks. So the original pride flag was created in 1977 by the artist Gilbert Baker, and it had 8 different colors. It was inspired by the song Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz. The night of the Stonewall Uprising was actually the same night that Judy Garland, the singer of that song, had passed away, and she had a very large gay fan base. And so some folks have attributed the Stonewall Uprising as in part to people mourning over her loss, though that can't be confirmed. It's one of the running theories. So I think that might be why the song is linked to the rainbow flag creation. The 8 original colors each symbolize an aspect of LGBTQ life. And then what happened was in 1979, when people started trying to get flags more readily available, the pink color wasn't accessible. It was a hard fabric to find. So they created the flag that we kind of know more traditionally, the 6-color flag, is really out of, again, necessity. They just couldn't find the hot pink and they wanted it to be symmetrical. So they got rid of the teal as well and it became a 6-color flag. And that was the flag that waved and does still wave a lot of times since 1979. Then in 2017, as part of the More Color, More Pride campaign in Philadelphia, a flag was created that added black and brown stripes to the 6-color flag to symbolize the fact that BIPOC means Black, Indigenous, people of color, folks who are not always represented within queer communities. A lot of times people view LGBT activism as a very white thing and sort of doesn't always create space for Black and brown and BIPOC folks. So this was added on as part of a campaign to create that inclusion in that space. And then in 1999, an artist named Monica Helms, who is a trans woman, created the Transgender Flag, which is a pink and blue to represent men and women, while the white stripe represents those in transition or those who don't feel they identify with any one particular gender identity. Then we have the non-binary flag, created in 2014 by Kai Rowan. The colors are yellow, white, purple, and black. Yellow signifies people who identify outside the binary, right outside of the idea of men, women. White represents people who might have multiple gender identities or identify as multigender. Purple signifies people who might identify, or whose identity is a blending of male and female or masculine and feminine. And black represents those who don't identify as having a gender. Then there is a flag that combines both the non-binary and trans pride flags because most transgender people would like to be inclusive of non-binary people and vice versa. So a flag was created that embraced both identities because there are people who identify as non-binary trans. The Intersex Flag, this is the most recent version of that, of the 2013, because there was a different flag that existed previously. This is the one that's used now. It's yellow and purple because neither of those colors are traditionally identified as a gender color. It's a circle is the symbol because it's a perfect unbroken symbol that represents the wholeness of intersex people as they are or as they choose to be. The flag of the asexual community was created in 2010 by the Asexual Visibility and Education Network. The black and gray represent the fact that each asexual defines their sexuality uniquely on a spectrum of their own attractions or lack of attractions. The white represents allyship for asexual individuals, and the purple represents the community overall. The bi pride flag, which is another one that we see pretty commonly represented, was created in 1998 by Michael Page, and the colors were intended to represent the way bisexual people can blend into both straight and LGBTQ communities. The colors of the flag have come to represent attraction to different genders. Pansexual, which is a term that has become more prominent in the last decade, it speaks to people who are attracted to individuals based on who they are as people, not necessarily because of their gender identity or their sexual orientation. Sometimes it's really simplified by saying people are attracted to people, not parts. And this flag represents attraction to women, the blue represents attraction to men, and the yellow represents attraction to those who do not identify within the binary. This is the flag for the lesbian community, created in 2010 as well. It uses different shades of pink to symbolize the vast women identities that can exist within the lesbian community. This is the gay men's pride flag, and it was modified in the recent years to include less blues and have other shades of green to acknowledge the fact that there are men in different gender spectrums. And then the modern pride flag, which is the one we're most commonly seeing people use these days. It's the modern pride flag that includes the black and brown stripes like the Philadelphia pride flag, as well as the trans pride. So this is a way of including folks who are transgender, gender non-conforming or gender expansive, and or folks who are just otherwise not defined in one way or the other who are queer. So again, just a quick sort of overview of these flags, because we're seeing so many of them nowadays, and they're being sent out to so many folks by corporations and other things.
Oh, that was great. Thank you so much. That was super informative. Even like you, that's not me. Like you're like it's like since it is Pride Month, you do see all of these everywhere. But I don't know how many times people actually sort of stop and think, oh, what does this mean? What is like the underlying?
When I saw the non-binary flag at Target, I was like, okay, maybe I need to add this into my workshops, because I was like, I had to research it. I didn't know what this color meant the first time I saw it in Target. I was like super excited. And now Nike is sending around sneakers that have all these flags. Like, it's great that companies are trying their best to be as inclusive as possible, even if it is capitalism. But I want to make sure folks actually know what they're wearing and representing and supporting, because I think it's important, again, that we're educating ourselves.
I super appreciate it.
Yeah.
I kind of want to shift gears a little bit since
Sure.
like we are like well since like we are like a youth workforce development
Sure.
associate like program organization. We work a lot on like youth engagement and youth empowerment. So I'd love to hear your insights and like advice on like how we can actually like empower and amplify voices of youth who are members or who identify as being part of the LGBTQ plus community.
I think, like with any marginalized group, we want to highlight the successes of those people and acknowledge that they are part of the culture, right? We always want to normalize when we're teaching and we're giving examples of things that show the wide variety of folks who make up our organizations. If folks are coming to your staff and saying, what help is out there for me? Locally, Staten Island, we do have a youth drop-in center, our drop-in program that is meeting virtually right now through Twitch and Google Meets. We're doing different workshops and things for our young people. We have an Instagram. So we have different ways to connect virtually, and the hope is to be in person by the end of the summer. And it's always been during after school hours. We do different field trips, and we're going to do field trips over the summer in ways that are safe and mindful of the current pandemic, even though things are lightening up. So I definitely urge folks to reach out to us through our other websites for Staten Island purposes, pridecentersi.org. Check us out on Facebook. We're on Instagram. But in terms of just other resources, the internet is a fantastic resource for young people, but we always want folks to be mindful of safety and making sure that they are, using caution and checking with adults that they can trust to access those websites. But there are other great resources available for young people. There's the Trevor Hotline, which is a 24-hour LGBT youth suicide prevention hotline. So if folks are feeling overwhelmed by family reactions to their identity, they can reach out through text, through email, and through phone calls with the Trevor Hotline, or the Trevor Project rather, to talk to someone at any time, because organizations like ours and the UAU, we're not always available. We're not 24 hours. So there's always someone to talk to. There's a lot of different after-school programs, both on Staten Island and in schools in the other boroughs. A lot of schools. The chancellor in New York City has about 60 pages of regulations that support LGBT students and teachers. Teachers are supported in having GSAs, gay straight alliances, or gender and sexuality alliances now, as they're called, to have different groups for LGBT students. I think the biggest hurdle is just if you are somebody that a young person has come out to, even if you are yourself a young person, ask that person, how can you be supportive? How can we amplify you? Not everybody wants to be amplified, right? We have to remember that sometimes. So we have to create language and policy and space for people to be who they are, but also acknowledge that not everyone's going to use it, or they may be individual. Like, that's a huge piece of advice as well, is if someone comes out to you as a member of the LGBTQ community, check in and just say, I really appreciate you sharing that with me. Do other people know? Right? We can't always assume that everyone's out to all people at all times. I think that's like the biggest thing I can really drive home, is that at any point someone might come out to you, it doesn't mean they've come out to everybody else in their life. And we don't want to be the person that outs them. We don't want to be the person that shares information that isn't ours to share.
That's a very true, poignant point that you make. And like, again, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's about not like jumping to assumptions, not thinking we know everything about everyone, because we all are, like we mentioned before, very unique. We're all individuals. We all share different parts of our personalities. We all sort of may feel more comfortable sharing some parts of our personalities to only a specific group of people.
Or safety, right? We don't know. Like if your family is going to kick you out of the house, you may not be very out. If your friend at school made a comment that something was gay and they were trying to make fun of somebody, you may not feel like you can come out to your friends because you heard that, right? So language matters because it's a wraparound thing. You know, if you make a joke that calls someone who's LGBT less than, your friend who's in the community will remember you making that joke and they're not going to come out to you as easily. Statistically speaking, the average age of coming out, as far as statistics tells us, is 15. So like young people are coming out more and more. So we definitely want to be mindful of how we make space for them. So we talk sometimes about this idea of safe space, and we at the center and a lot of organizations have moved away from that. And we say brave space because it takes bravery to be honest about who you are with people. And we can't always guarantee that it's going to be safe because we live in a world that causes wounds, that causes harm sometimes. And people say things they don't always mean to say. But we can certainly make space for people as best we can to tell us who they are, to be brave, and hope that that can be helpful.
I'm happy to hear that. I know like you're talking, like I like you're mentioning like a good point like that. We always say like it's always your impact over your intent. Like you may not mean to hurt someone, you may not understand like the negative connotations that may be associated with something you say, but it always isn't. But that doesn't matter at the end of the day. It is how the other person takes and internalizes what you say or how you act.
Right. I think whenever anyone is using identity as the way to make fun of something or to make a joke, somebody's hearing it that might identify the way that you're using a joke, and that will change the relationship you have with that person, and it may change the way they interact with space. So just be mindful of that, right? You know, I know a lot of us don't always think like before we speak, and it's hard, but I think it can be really the difference between creating space for someone and shutting someone off and shutting someone out. How do you just addressing a room of people? This is a great question. Thank you for that, Corey. So I use folks a lot. You'll notice I've used that one. That's the one I like best. It rolls off my tongue the most naturally. Some people use humans. To me, that feels a little formal or scientific, but again, that's my preference. Y'all is great. I also do use y'all a lot, but that doesn't again always roll off New Yorkers' tongues as easily. Just really hard, and it's hard, and I will own it that I still could be guilty of saying you guys or you know guys, and like it's a hard one because it's a gendered term, right? We want to try to get away from that. So also just being mindful of what one you use now and thinking of how you can most easily substitute it for something that is universal. Again, folks is the one we use a lot at the center. It's the one I like personally. But again, you might have another term for everybody. Everybody, that one works too. Yeah, you guys it's such a New Yorker thing. Like I'm from Brooklyn, and you guys is like I think how my parents referred to. I'm also the 6 or 7 kids, so you guys is literally how they refer to all of us all the time. So it's just a hard one to break. But folks has really helped, and using it in emails helps too. So like now I write my emails to the team like folks, here's what's going on, or whatever the case may be, and that helps because it translates it to my professional life and my personal life.
Yeah, that's a good example. Like even using like something as broad as like hi everyone, or even like
yeah, everyone, everybody.
Yeah, like hi all.
Yeah, all is good. Whenever again, we all have a term that we use without realizing we use it that isn't you guys. I know we do. Or even ladies, like if we're talking to a group of what we assume to be women identified folks, like avoiding that, like again, just checking in with ourselves and like trying to do the best we can do. We all make mistakes. We're human.
Yeah, I mean, it's just important to own it, internalize it, and move on. Like just mindful the next time.
Right. And I think that's a huge thing to remember too, is like if you make mistakes linguistically, don't explain why you made the mistake. It doesn't, it doesn't really matter. Just quickly sort of say, oh, I'm really sorry you used they pronouns. I'll be mindful of that going forward.
If you don't have any more, that's totally fine. I'd like to throw you one last one.
Sure.
And that's kind of like just like a generic, like what's like one final piece of advice or like one biggest takeaway you want our audience to take with them or that you would like to share?
Just let the LGBTQ people in your life lead the way in the conversations you have with them. Like, check in with the people you care about and say, is there a way that I can be supportive for you? And if you are an LGBTQ person, because I don't know who's on this chat, like, don't feel like you can't ask for support from the people you care about and the people you trust, right? If you're out and you trust people in your life, check in with them and say, I could really use support in this way or that way. Come to Pride with me. Come to see this movie with me. I want to go to the Pride Center for the first time. Do you think you'd go with me? We have no policy about who can attend our space. We let anybody into our space. We do have an orientation that we ask folks to go through that kind of covers language and policies and rules, but anyone's welcome to join us. And so again, I think just feeling like you can ask the people in your life how you can support them, and you can also ask for support and to be supported. I think we forget that sometimes. I am really grateful. Thank you so much for having me, Stacey, and happy Pride.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. And
Thank
to
you.
everyone watching this, I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.